I'm teaching a class about warfare and cultural warfare at Indiana University this summer, and one of the books that we read is the classical The Face of Battle by John Keegan. Now, we are reading with my students the part about World War I and the Somme offensive, and I wanted to bring an activity to class that would allow my students to get a better sense of the dynamics and the specific elements of trench warfare. Keegan does an excellent job of describing the experience of World War I, trench warfare, charges in no man's land. But if I can bring an activity to class, a game that allows them to see things more dynamically, more interactively, I know that then the contents will stick to the student's mind better, they will be better remembered, it will be just more interesting to them, which is always good for pedagogical purposes. So I've been looking for a game about trench warfare. I knew of one only, actually, that really tried to capture the experience, and that was Trench Zone, which I played a couple of years ago. I didn't like it very much. It was pretty tedious, pretty repetitive. You just amassed a bunch of people, and once or twice or three times a game, you would send them over the top, they're killed, repeat. Very thematic, yes, but that's one of the cases when the theme definitely diminishes the enjoyment of the game or prevents pretty much any form of enjoyment of the game. At least I didn't like the game very much. So I'm looking for something that is thematic, can be pedagogically useful, but also is playable. And this is when I found a game. Here it is. Actually, here there are multiple copies. This game is called Attrition, and it meets all of the requirements that I have when playing games with my students. Requirements are at least things that I find desirable. Possibly a game that is free or at least cheap, so I can acquire multiple copies to play with my class. Usually I have large classes, so just a copy of a game is rarely enough, depending on the game, of course. Or print and play games, so actually without spending much I can make multiple copies like I did here. I made 6 copies, or I can make I can ask the students to make them. Now, Attrition is a dice and card game that does represent trench warfare. There is a deck of cards that you can build. The game is from Warspawn, a website with a lot of free designs. Many of those you will just find the rules, then you build your components. Occasionally there is a game that also comes with art and components that you can print, and this would be the case. I haven't even mounted these cards, I haven't sleeved them, I hadn't glued them on cardboard because it was pressed for time, I didn't have much time. But the game is perfectly playable even if you just print the sheets of paper and you cut them and you make the cards. So there's a deck of approximately 60 cards representing various resources that the players may use during the game. The game abstractly represents the struggle between two different armies in World War I, and each player is defending 3 sectors, 3 territories, 3 sections of a trench, call it whatever you want, but the point is that these 3 objectives that each player controls at the beginning and is defending have a no man's land in between. They are part of trench warfare, so you need to go about capturing those objectives through trench warfare. By the way, it's abstracted, you don't have a board. All you need is to have the 2 players using 2 sheets of paper. Each player writes a 3 on their sheet of paper at the beginning. If I take an objective from you, then you cross that and you turn yours into 2. I cross my 3 and turns into a 4. Maybe you take it back, so we have 3 and 3, 2 and 4, 4 and 2, 5 and 1, and so on. You just do it numerically. You also need a sheet of paper where you simply write down the number 100. That's the number of squats that you have at the beginning. During the game you will take damage, and you will simply subtract the number of squats that you lose from your total. You win the game in one of 2 ways: by reducing the squats of the opponent to 0 when you still have some squats, or by taking control of all the 6 territories in the game. 3 and 3, 6. But how do you do that? First, you shuffle the deck of cards and you place it face down in the middle of the table. Then, first player goes, and at the beginning of your turn, you simply draw a card and you add it to your hand. That's it. Which seemed very random, which is thematic. You don't know exactly which resources you're gonna get when you're organizing the attacks, the offensives in your trench. You had to deal with what you get, but actually I ruled differently. I wanted to make the game a little more interesting for my students. So the way we played it is that at the beginning of your turn you draw 2 cards, you choose one, and the one that you don't want goes to the bottom of the deck. Next, you are attacking the opponent with artillery. What do you do? Very complicated? No. You roll a die, and the result is the number of squads that the opponent loses. Super abstract, impersonal, dry, inhumane. Nothing you can do to prevent it, nothing that you can do to improve your chances of a good attack. You're attacking blind, the opponent takes the hit. That's it. I think it works very well. Keegan describes this problem of having a hard time in World War I when trying to assess how much damage your shelling did to the trenches of the opponent, how difficult it was to be able to organize a consistent defense against that. So, strange in gameplay terms, but thematically very accurate. Then you have to decide whether you want to charge or not. Again, you do not have a board. You simply announce, I'm charging or not charging. If you're charging, then of course you'll resolve a charge. If you're not charging, it may still be that the high command decides that you charge. So you roll a die, a d6. If you roll a 1, you charge anyways, even if you didn't want to. Now, if you didn't want to charge and you were not forced to charge, your turn is over. If you did charge, because you wanted or because you were forced, then you resolve the charge, which again is resolved abstractly. Imagine your people coming out of the trench and running through no man's land against machine guns and defenses. What happens is that the opponent rolls a die, and the number that comes on the die is the number of squads that you lose. You cross off from your total, and that's the number of squads that you lose in the charge. Now, after losing Keegan, the idea that you could roll a d6 in a charging no man's land and lose a single squad seemed to me too nice, too harmless. So I made a modifications here that you cannot roll less than 3. So if you roll 1 or 2, you read them as 3. If you roll 3 is 3, 4 is 4, 5 is 5, 6 is 6. So you will lose, if you play the game with me, a more brutal way of the game in which you lose between 3 and 6 squads every time that you charge. Then, if you still have squads in your army by that time, after that defense, you resolve the charge. You resolve the trench fight. So your people have reached the trench of the opponent. What happens here? Both players roll 2d6. Then that number that comes out is the number of damage that you inflict on the opponent. I rolled a 7, you rolled a 2. That's how much damage we deal to each other. Then, if the attacker's total in this roll here is higher than that of the opponent, then the attacker has taken control of one of the locations of the defender. So then you modify the number of territories that the 2 players have. Otherwise, nothing happens. The simply damage is assigned to the 2 players, but if the defender dealt more damage or equal damage, there's no change of territory. This is the game at its core. Draw a card, inflict damage, decide if you want to charge, take damage as you're charging, take and inflict damage when you resolve trench combat. That's it. So it's very mathematical and completely devoid of decisions. Well, not completely, you can choose to charge or not to charge, but once you're in, the action takes on its own momentum. But things become more interesting because of the cards, because of the effects of the cards that you can play in various moments depending on the effect of the card. Master Gas you play during the barrage phase, it kills more enemy squads during the initial barrage. Tank, the active player plays in the defensive fire phase, so that is when you are being attacked. It negates a Master Gas card or a barbed wire card. Minefield kills more squads. So you have some cards that inflict damage, some cards that interact with other cards by preventing the damage that they do. Hand grenades, typhoid fever, gas masks, air recon. You look at an opponent's hand and you discard cards from there. various types of effect. Flamethrowers, guess what? It kills more people. There's a lot of stuff that increases the damage that you inflict. There's one that I want to show you, and I saw it earlier, of course, now I can't find it anymore, which was the major offensive, which allows you to keep going with the attack once you launch a charge. Basically, you repeat your charge, and of course, now I can't find it to save my life. Doesn't matter, that's what it is. Reinforcements. There's a card that gives you reinforcements. Also, there is an optional rule that says that you may assign reinforcements to the players. And what I did, actually, as my students were playing the game and I was directing the game, I assigned random reinforcements. I simply told them, okay, now everybody rolls a die and gets this 6 reinforcement. That's it. There was no warning of when that would happen, if it would take a long while before they would get a reinforcement. I said, okay, everybody who has a last name that starts between A and M gains 2 reinforcements. That's it. Completely random to simulate, again, the complete lack of control of the commanders in the trenches of the people that the higher command would send to reinforce their action. Another important requirement for me to consider including a game in the classroom is that the game needs to be playable in a reasonable amount of time, and attrition plays in about an hour, less than an hour actually, depending on various factors, but between 40 minutes and an hour you should be fine, which is great. I'm teaching my class, which is 2 hours per session. So it's great. We can start with a general discussion of the topic of the day. Maybe we have a student presentation, then I can explain the game, we can play it, and we still have time at the end to reconvene and discuss the game, to talk about the things that we learned, how the game captured theme, and the specifics of the warfare of the time, etc., etc. So really good as a class activity, and I have to say my students enjoyed it. This is a good game, a great game. If you're looking at it from a purely gaming perspective, just as a gamer who wants to play a good game, this is not that much of a game. It's not all that exciting. It's probably your impression will be, meh, that's okay, it's okay. Because there have been decisions that have been made pretty drastic to capture theme, and the impersonality, inhumanity of some of the elements of World War I are captured here, which of course don't always make for a game that is exciting and intriguing. If you want a game of that kind with a narrative that is more nuanced, that has back and forth, it has a climax, then definitely Trenches of Valor is an excellent game by Victory Point Games. It feels more like an adventure movie in the trenches than trench warfare purely. This game actually is Attrition. The name is Attrition, so don't expect the Clausewitzian hits that will shock the opponent, and that will be the heroic element that determines the outcome of the battle. Is slow, is painful, constant eating at the opponent's resources as the opponent is eating at yours. Attrition, attrition, attrition. Charge after charge, barrage after barrage, over and over again. Repetitive mechanic, but that, however, as I said, doesn't play for too long, and you have some degree of control when it comes to the cards, especially if you play my variant. So it has some things that you can do around the situation, which forces the opponents to do not much else than to collect resources, to defend themselves, and to throw them against the opponent. Repeat. In that sense, again, the decisions that were made in terms of game design were pretty brave, I would say, pretty drastic, pretty uncompromising. It's a game that does capture the sense of attrition resulting from charging in no man's land and from trench warfare in general in World War I. Precisely because of this, actually makes for an excellent teaching activity. Therefore, this is an activity that I will use in my classes about warfare in the future. I really managed me to show in an interactive way what I want to show to the students, some of the most specific elements of the face of battle in World War II as experienced by the people that were there. I don't know, it's a game that I will ever play outside of the classroom. Maybe you can use it to introduce several concepts of wargaming to young gamers, but not even. You don't have X encounters, you don't have zones of control, lines of supply. It's so abstract that it barely feels like a war game when we compare it to the traditional war games. But if a war game is a game that has a war theme and captures the dynamics of war, actually in this sense this is a perfect war game. It doesn't look like other war games, doesn't do it in the same way other war games have done it. Cuts goes straight to the target, but I believe in that sense this is a war game. There's a war game, not much of an introduction to wargaming because it's so different from other war games, but the war is there, the game is there, the attrition is there, a good, very, very broad, of course, broad strokes, but an overall satisfying portrait of the experience of trench warfare in World War I is there. So I'm glad that I found it, I'm glad that I played it, I'm going to include it in my future class about warfare. As I said, unlikely I will play it with my friends as a game, but for what it is, even if just as an activity, as a pedagogical activity, I think this is a good one. Definitely my students enjoyed it, and I found that it really resonated well within the context of a classroom. Attrition, free print and play game about World War I.